You are listening to Book Clips, a podcast where authors and narrators expose you to excerpts from different books. You can find the show and more by searching for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean or Stitcher.
Hi, this is Robyn Nyx, and I'm going to be reading from Escape in Time, the first in the Extractor series trilogy. We're going to join Landry and Delaney in Chapter 4. December 20, 2075, Pulsis Island. Delaney woke to the sounds of Playlist 1 on repeat, and the throbbing in her head reminded her that she alone had emptied the bottle of bourbon that rested in her hand. She placed it on the table, got up and headed to the kitchen to see what hangover cure the fridge might be harbouring. Music, Playlist 6, 60 decibels. The soft sounds of Sade began to soothe her troubled mind. It wasn't just her dehydrated brain that hurt. All this effort to fix the past when the present could benefit from a little attention too. She pulled a bottle of protein and spinach elixir from the fridge door, took a dirty glass from the sink and filled it with the green gunk. After the excitement of the first missions and the novelty had worn off some, she began to comprehend the horror of her new job. Delaney's vacation time now started with a drink. It was a few shots at first to calm and resituate her mind in the present, but the things she'd done in the past began to revisit her often, and it failed to quiet their voices or dampen the vivid images. A few shots quickly turned into the full bottle. A bottle on the first night turned into a bottle every night, unless Landry was coming over, and then she'd just settle her nerves with one shot. Sex with Landry was better than any alcohol, and her pussy was the one body part she didn't want to numb. Delaney picked up her phone and her thumb hovered over the speed dial to Landry. She looked at the time and figured she'd already be heading for the mainland. Just hearing her voice provided some comfort though, so she pressed it anyway and waited for Landry's perfunctory message.
Hey Delaney, what's up?
Landry's voice startled her. She shouldn't be home. You shouldn't be home. She snapped her fingers to mute the music.
Yeah, well, I somehow managed to invite Mom over for breakfast. She wanted to check on me after the state I got back in yesterday. It would have been a lot worse if you hadn't stepped in.
Delaney knew that saying thank you didn't come easy to Landry, but she teased her anyway. Stepped in? That's an understated way of saying saved my ass, don't you think?
What do you want, a medal for doing your job, hotshot?
You're the extractor. You're supposed to be the hotshot, not me.
I'm no island, Delaney. You know I appreciate your backup, and I wouldn't want anyone else by my side.
Landry's voice had softened. No one else would have spotted it but her. Delaney smiled ruefully and was glad Landry was only on voice and not full facial hookup. She didn't just want to be by her side on missions. But they were soldiers, and soldiers didn't admit that kind of thing to each other. Are you heading to the mainland? Soon, or do you have time for coffee? The lengthy silence from Landry told Delaney more than any words she could have spoken.
I'm already late. There's a game I've got to see. The Warriors are playing the Clippers in their first game since Coach Durant got fired. I want to see how the team reacts.
What's so fascinating about watching 10 women run from one end of a court to the other and back again for 48 minutes? Delaney knew her ridiculous question would diffuse the awkward quiet that had settled on their conversation.
You can't be serious. Quite apart from the fact that they tend to be pretty fucking sexy women, and they all get sweated up and glistening within minutes, there's the fine matter of the beauty of the game.
Fuck that. There's hardly any skill to it. Bounce, bounce, score. Give the ball to the other team. Bounce, bounce, score. Let's talk about football if you want to talk about beautiful game.
I'll grant you, football has its merits, but a basketball game is more intimate, more intense. There's nowhere to hide on that court, as opposed to football, where you can substitute an entire team to play a different part of the game.
Delaney smiled, knowing that Landry would be emphasising her point with her hands, even though nobody could see her. Chop my hands off and I'd be mute, she'd heard Landry say 100 times. Chopping your hands off would be a travesty to lesbians everywhere, was Delaney's stock response. So speaks someone who could never ever make the football team. Delaney's teasing deflected her own longing for an entirely different conversation.
I never tried out for the football team. I decided early on I wanted my brain intact, and I've always been too fond of speech to play a game where I'm all but guaranteed a concussion every few weeks.
Not if you're so fast they can't catch you.
Are you calling me slow? That guy came out of nowhere. I'd have left him way behind, begging for his life. How could I know he'd come after me?
Delaney could tell from Landry's tone she hadn't yet reconciled the reason behind her run-in with the meaty guy on their last mission. Delaney hadn't even brought it up, and she wasn't going to. Things like that didn't make it to the debrief. It was an unspoken soldier's oath. You didn't. Forget about it. You didn't say anything, did you? 'Cause I didn't, Landry. That shit stayed there as far as I'm concerned. There was a different reason for this new silence, and Delaney wanted to fill it with words of affection and tender comfort, but she held back. Landry wouldn't entertain that on a regular day, let alone one where Delaney felt she was actually getting a glimpse of her vulnerability.
What if Elena hadn't invented regenerative tech, Dee? I'd be dead.
Vicious images of Landry's broken body assaulted her. She swallowed hard, trying to head off the bile she felt rising to the back of her throat. Landry dead. It was a thought she wouldn't entertain. What's the point in torturing yourself? She did invent it, and the world has you to thank for that. You jumped back and saved your mum, and now she gets to save us. You had an error in judgment, that's all. It happens, apparently even to the best of us. I'm pretty fucking sure you won't make the same mistake again. Delaney was beginning to wonder if Landry was having the same doubts she was about their work. Did she want out? She'd been close to death when they jumped. Had nearly dying made her reconsider how she was living.
You're right. I was being stupid. It's time for a hard-earned break.
Delaney detected a change in attitude. The woman shut down faster than an Olympic sprinter could outrun a zombie. Stopping a zombie apocalypse. I wonder when we get that mission. So I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Count on it. Have a great vacation, Hotshot.
The line went dead before Delaney could respond, and she tossed the phone across the kitchen counter. What exactly does a great vacation even look like, Landry? A never-ending line of baller fans desperate for you to fuck them. She drained the glass of its now warm liquid and threw it at the wall. It bounced off and landed at her feet, frustratingly still in one piece. Some clever fuck had invented non-breakable glass. Not all technological advances were welcome. Sometimes there was nothing that satisfied anger more than the sight and sound of smashing glass. She had to get a grip and stop chasing Landry. She wasn't running, and it wasn't her fault she was emotionally unavailable. God, she hated therapist jargon, but she knew that kind of disconnect made their job easier, and that's how Delaney had been too, for the most part, thanks to her family history. So why couldn't she just have stayed that way? Pulses need detached and unaffected operatives. They didn't need unpredictable and overly sensitive assholes. Why can't I move on? Landry's first view of San Francisco after a mission always comforted her. It was home in a way nowhere else had been since the death of her father. And though the landscape had changed irrevocably since the 60s earthquake had levelled the whole city, it still managed to remind her of a simpler time. This was the place her father had taken her to see the decommissioned naval ship USS Independence. It was where she'd fallen in love with the idea of following her father's footsteps by serving her country. She'd chosen the army before joining the Navy SEALs, accepted as one of only a few annual inter-service transfers. Working with Pulses was rewarding, there was no doubt about that. Knowing you were an integral part of changing the world for the better, saving people who would go on to save millions, was good for the soul. And the remuneration was generous, necessarily so to make up for the fact that any hope of a normal life was extinguished the moment you signed up. She'd wanted to live in the Fisherman's Wharf area, the once thriving pseudo-centre of San Francisco, but it had fallen into the bay with the quake. With the introduction of the Handbook of the San Francisco Building Laws, the rest of the city and the newly carved coastline had been repopulated with 3-story buildings. The neoteric wharf was mostly restaurants, boutique shops and coffee houses. It was the new place to be, and it was the place Landry had chosen as her home away from the island, away from Pulses. Somewhere busy enough with tourists for her coming and going not to be noticed. Somewhere busy enough with tourists to keep her amused on lonely evenings. The family was sitting at the table by the window, as she knew they would be at this time of day, sitting down to eat together after the usual lunchtime rush. As soon as they recognised her, they were out of their chairs and into the street, pulling her into a group hug. It hadn't been her plan to get this close to the people she was living above, but events on one of her early Pulses vacations ended with the family's informal adoption of her. They gave her no choice. "We've missed you, Lan. You were gone long time." Landry smiled at Priscilla, the small girl who'd wrapped her arms tightly around her right thigh, seemingly in no hurry to let go. The last mission had taken her to 2015. The time travel technology was advanced, but they hadn't yet figured how to stop it entirely. Jumping forward 60 years resulted in re-entering 2075, 60 days from the initial jump for the mission. Add to that the mission training time, and she'd been away from home for 4 months. "Ah, my sweet little pea, I've only been gone 4 months." Landry accompanied her words with a ruffle of her short blonde hair. Priscilla scrunched her eyes up and smiled a beautifully innocent smile. I'm Robyn Nyx. You've been listening to Escape in Time, available from Bold Strokes Books now. Thanks for listening.
This was an episode of Book Clips. Check out the show notes for more on this book. And it would be great if you would rate the show and subscribe to the Lesbian Talk Show podcast channel for more woman-centered content. If you are an author of lesbian fiction, then send us your reading. You can find out how on thelesbiantalkshow.com/reading.